They tore down my garden because it didn't fit their idea of order, but I hold the one thing they can't live without: the water. I stood on my porch as the bulldozer crushed lavender and wildflowers I'd nurtured for months. The roar of engines filled the air, drowning out every peaceful sound I'd ever known here. Maria Whitmore, the HOA president, watched with a satisfied smile. She believed she had all the power. To her, I was just an outsider who broke the rules, someone who needed to be taught a lesson. What she didn't realize was that beneath my feet lay a valve from 1887. One that controls the creek feeding this entire community, including her husband's cattle ranch. They bulldozed my garden. Thought I'd stay quiet, but I control the water now, and this fight is just beginning. After 15 years in a concrete box, I traded my tie for timber and silence. I left behind cold offices and endless reports no one read. I bought this patch of land on the outskirts of Willowbrook Estates. It wasn't much, just 20 acres of pine trees, wildflowers, and a creek that whispered through the woods. For the first time in years, I felt grounded. My house is simple. A wooden porch that creaks with the wind windows that open wide to let fresh air in. No recycled office air here. This land gave me something the city never could: peace. I spent my days pulling weeds and planting native flowers, building something real with my own hands. But peace doesn't last long when power is threatened. And that's exactly what happened next. Maria showed up one bright morning, her heels clicking on my wooden porch. She looked around my house and garden with thinly veiled disdain. "This doesn't fit our community standards," she said flatly. Her tone left no room for argument. She wasn't just criticizing the house, she was claiming ownership over how I should live. Her perfectly manicured nails flipped through a thick packet of HOA rules like she was reciting a script she'd memorized. To her, my wooden house was a mistake, my wildflowers a threat to the neighborhood's order. I wiped dirt from my hands and met her gaze steady. But I knew then this wasn't about flowers or wood. It was about control, and she was determined to prove she had it. The first notice hit my door like a slap: grass too tall. Trees out of place fines stacking up every week. I stared at the paper and laughed bitterly, shaking my head in disbelief. Didn't know lavender was a felony these days, I muttered to myself. It wasn't about safety or community order. It was about control, pure and simple. Every line screamed a warning: conform or disappear. I had built this place with my own hands, but to them it was just a nuisance. Their rules weren't meant to protect, they were meant to push me out. This wasn't my home anymore. It was their playground, and I was just an unwanted guest caught in a game rigged to break me down piece by piece. Workers showed up early one morning, chainsaws in hand. They didn't ask. They just started cutting. The trees I planted with hope and sweat fell silently beneath their blades. I stood there powerless, watching pieces of my life disappear. Later, I tried to greet Elizabeth, my neighbor, the woman who once brought me homemade cookies. She stepped back, eyes darting away like I was carrying the plague. No smile, no wave, just cold distance. The neighborhood I thought was home was turning into a silent battlefield. Isolation stung worse than the falling branches. They weren't just cutting trees, they were cutting ties, and I was left standing alone among the ruins. I wrote back detailed and firm, asking for a fair hearing. I wanted to attend the HOA meeting to defend my home and my rights. But the response was silence. No acknowledgement, no invitation. I wasn't just uninvited, I was erased. Like I didn't exist. The meeting went on without me, decisions made behind closed doors. It hit harder than any bulldozer. They didn't just want my garden gone, they wanted me gone too. And that's when I realized this fight wasn't just about flowers, it was about survival, and I was alone in the ring. They came back a few days later with red stakes. Thin wooden poles hammered deep into my flower beds and along the fence line. Each stake marked a boundary I never agreed to. The workers moved with cold precision like soldiers marking territory. I couldn't help but see those stakes as blood flags, warnings planted in my own dirt. It wasn't about gardening anymore. It was about a battle for control. Every red flag felt like a countdown to destruction. I stood there, hands clenched, watching my sanctuary become a war zone. The fight was no longer just personal, it was a warning to anyone who dared stand in their way. While digging around the edge of my porch, I uncovered something unexpected. An old metal pipe, rusty and covered in dirt. Etched deep into its surface were the words, "Water Control, 1887. Buried under roots and lies, this valve had been forgotten for decades. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, feeling the weight of history beneath my hands. This wasn't just a relic. It was a symbol of power, one that no HOA rule could erase. For the first time, I realized I held more than just land. I held control over the very water that kept this community alive. The quiet strength beneath the soil was about to turn the tide. And suddenly this fight wasn't just about flowers anymore. I reached down and turned the rusty valve slowly. Within moments, the creek behind my land began to slow. The clear water that had run steady for months dwindled to a trickle. Then, just as quietly, I turned the valve back. The water surged again, flowing like nothing had changed. In that silent moment, I understood the power I held. This was more than land, it was control over life itself. Turns out, peace has plumbing, and I've got the wrench. No one in that neighborhood realized just how much their comfort depended on what lay beneath my porch. And that realization was about to change everything. I spent hours at the county clerk's office sifting through dusty records and faded maps. The documents showed one thing clearly: the water rights dated back to 1887. A legal claim older than the HOA bylaws trying to push me around. Their rules didn't overwrite the Constitution or historic rights attached to this land. I held proof, ironclad, undeniable. This wasn't just a scrap of paper, it was a shield. The law was on my side, and now I had the facts to back it up. Whatever they planned next, they'd have to face more than angry words. They'd have to face the law itself. Their bylaws don't overwrite the Constitution. That was the quiet power buried beneath my feet. I learned something that hit harder than any bulldozer. The creek I controlled wasn't just any stream. It fed the water troughs of Tom Whitmore's cattle ranch, the same Tom who happened to be Maria's husband. Over 1,000 head of cattle depended on that water. She messed with the wrong valve. By trying to force me out, Maria risked starving her own husband's livelihood. This fight wasn't just about a garden anymore, it was about survival for more than just me. I realized I held a power that stretched far beyond my own land, and that knowledge shifted everything. The war had just become personal for all of us. I nailed a wooden sign at the edge of my property. It read, "Water Rights, 1887, bold letters against weathered wood." Some saw just a sign, but for me, it was a declaration, a warning to anyone thinking they could steamroll me. That little board spoke louder than any argument. It marked the boundary of my power, and it was perfectly legal, backed by decades of history and law. Neighbors passing by couldn't ignore it. Whispers started spreading questions about what it really meant. The quiet strength of that sign shook the neighborhood. Sometimes the simplest symbols hold the greatest power, and this one was about to change everything. Maria burst into the HOA meeting, her face flushed red, voice sharp and trembling with rage. "He's threatening our entire community," she spat, eyes blazing with fury. Her words echoed through the room like a shot fired in a quiet town. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate to hold on to the power slipping through her fingers. "I'm fighting to protect our property values and our way of life," she screamed. But her tone betrayed her fear. Fear that the community was starting to see the truth behind her actions. Her usual polished, controlled facade was gone. For the first time, the rawness of her anger was visible, and it scared some of the residents. They began to murmur, questioning her motives, shaking the foundation she had built. Maria's grip on the community was cracking right before their eyes. A neighbor shot back sharply. "Threatening you, bulldozed his garden on fake permits." The room shifted the tide, turning as more voices rose in protest. Maria's glare faltered for a split second, her rage bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm just trying to keep order here," she barked defensively. "But at what cost?" Another voice challenged the frustration clear in their tone. "Order. You're tearing this place apart," someone else called out. Her confident mask cracked under the weight of the community's growing opposition. Whispers became voices. Voices turned to shouts, and soon the whole room was against her. The control she wielded so tightly was slipping fast. For the first time, Maria was losing the narrative and the fight. Maria's voice grew shaky as she tried to regain control. "I'm only enforcing the rules for everyone's benefit," she insisted, though doubt crept into her eyes. "But it feels like you're punishing one person," a neighbor said, stepping forward. The room nodded in agreement, the anger palpable. Her usual sharp retorts faltered, replaced by defensive stammers. "I'm trying to protect the neighborhood's value and safety," she repeated, but the conviction was gone. The crowd's eyes bore into her, no longer convinced by her excuses. Her carefully crafted image was unraveling. Behind the angry words, fear and desperation peeked through. Maria was losing more than a battle over land, she was losing her place in the community. The murmurs swelled the whispers, now a wave of dissent. At the next community meeting, things got tense fast. Tom Whitmore, Maria's husband, stood up. His voice was steady but sharp. "Maria," he said, looking her straight in the eye, "you said this was about protecting the community." He paused, letting the room hang on his words. "But is it really? Or is it about control?" The room fell silent. Maria's confident mask flickered. For the first time, the fight became personal inside their own home. Tom's question cut deeper than any argument Maria had thrown at me. It exposed cracks in her story and their marriage. That moment shifted the entire battle. It wasn't just me against her anymore. It was truth against deception. And Tom's voice was the first to speak it aloud. Before dawn, the machines rolled in like a storm on the horizon. The bulldozer's massive blade tore through my lavender and wildflowers, crushing months of careful growth under steel treads. The small shed I'd built with my own hands splintered into shards in seconds. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel and crushed earth, a bitter mix that clawed at my lungs. I stood frozen, helpless, watching the destruction unfold. Maria stood nearby, a twisted smile playing on her lips as if she were watching a victory parade. Each broken branch, every flattened flower felt like a wound to my spirit. The physical damage was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. But deep inside, a cold, burning fire was igniting. I wasn't going to be beaten by this. This destruction only made me more determined. I was ready to fight back harder than ever. The machines showed no mercy. The metal tracks crushed everything in their path, the delicate blooms, the rough soil, the young fruit trees that had yet to bear. Diesel fumes mingled with the scent of torn roots and broken branches. It was as if they were erasing years of hope with each pass. Maria's smile twisted darker, a queen watching her kingdom burn and feeling victorious. I could barely breathe, the pain, physical and raw, cutting deeper than any fine or letter. Every crushed petal was a blow to my heart. But amid the wreckage, my resolve grew. I wouldn't just survive this attack, I would come back stronger. The battle was no longer just about property rights. It was a fight for my dignity, my peace, and my future. I sat down that night and wrote my final letter. Calm, firm, with no room for misunderstanding. I told them this: if they crossed the line again, the water would stay off. No warnings, no second chances. I wasn't bluffing. The valve under my porch wasn't just a tool, it was my last line of defense. This letter wasn't just words, it was a countdown. A promise that the next move would be theirs or mine, but not both. For months I'd tried to reason, to negotiate, but Maria had made it clear she wasn't interested in peace, so I prepared for what was coming. Because sometimes justice doesn't trickle, it dries up. I delivered that letter to every mailbox in the HOA. Each envelope carried a warning not just to Maria, but to the entire community. One more inch of harassment, one more fine, and they'd all feel the consequences. One more inch, and you'll thirst for miles. I wanted them to understand the stakes. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a battle for survival, and I held the key. No more silent suffering. No more watching my home get torn apart. The water was mine to control, and I was ready to use it. Every neighbor received the message. The game had changed, and there was no turning back. I walked into the HOA meeting with my evidence in hand. Maps, legal documents, and the video of Maria destroying my sign. I wasn't there to argue. I came to demonstrate. I laid out the history of the water rights, the boundaries, and the law. Then I connected my phone to a small pump ready to show them how the valve worked. The room grew silent as I explained the power I held beneath my porch. No more guesses, no more rumors, just facts and proof. This was a public trial, and I was ready to hold the court. Their faces changed as the reality set in. This fight was no longer about flowers or fences. It was about control, and I was holding the key. I pressed the button on my phone. Slowly, the creek's flow began to thin. Clear water gave way to a bare, dry bed. The room held its breath. Then my phone rang. It was Tom. His voice cracked with panic. "My cattle, they're thirsty, Travis. The troughs are empty. I'm losing them." His words hit like a punch. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was life or death. The weight of control rested in my hands. Every eye in the room turned toward me. The silence was deafening. In that moment, everything changed. The fight had moved from paper to real water, real survival, and there was no going back. The room erupted in murmurs, then shouts. Neighbors who once sided with Maria now turned their anger toward her. "You brought this on us," someone yelled. Faces once filled with doubt now showed betrayal and frustration. They realized the crisis wasn't caused by me, it was caused by the woman who claimed to protect them. Maria's words lost their power. Her control slipped as the community questioned her motives. Whispers turned into voices demanding answers. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I was the man standing up to the real threat, and the people were listening. The tide had finally turned against Maria. Her reign of control was crumbling before their eyes. Tom dropped to his knees right in front of me, voice shaking with desperation. "Please," he begged, "don't make them suffer for her pride." His eyes were wet, worn from years of hard work and worry for his cattle. He wasn't just asking for water, he was pleading for mercy. The weight of that moment hit me harder than any legal battle. This was about more than power or revenge. It was about life, about animals who depended on that water to survive. I could see the pain etched into Tom's face, and I knew I had a choice to make. Would I let pride win, or would I do what was right? That moment wasn't just a turning point in the fight, it was a test of who I wanted to be. I turned the valve back on. Water rushed through the creek, filling the troughs and calming the land. The room erupted in applause relief, washing over every face. Maria stood silent, her usual fire gone. She looked defeated, stripped of the power she once held so tightly. I didn't win this fight alone. Justice did. It wasn't about me standing up to her, it was about what was right. The water flowed again, carrying with it the hope for peace. In that moment, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The community saw truth, and for once power belonged to fairness, not fear. This was the quiet victory I'd been waiting for, and it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Maria left Willowbrook Estates quietly, her power slipping away with each mile she put between us. She once ruled with an iron fist, but power dies in silence. No grand goodbye, no fight left to give. Just the fading echo of a reign built on fear and control. Her absence was a relief, a heavy weight lifting from the community's shoulders. I watched as neighbors slowly began to rebuild trust and peace. The woman who tore through my life was gone, leaving behind a lesson no one could forget. Power isn't about force, it's about respect. And when respect fades, so does power. Maria's chapter closed, and mine was just beginning. Tom showed up one morning carrying bags of soil and packets of seeds. He didn't say a word, just rolled up his sleeves and started working beside me. Together we planted new roots in the ruined garden, not just flowers, but hope and trust. The earth smelled fresh, alive with possibility. We rebuild with roots, not rules, I told him quietly. His nod said more than words ever could. Tom wasn't just a neighbor anymore, he became an ally, a friend. We talked late into the morning, sharing stories and plans. The creek flowed steadily nearby, a gentle reminder of what we'd fought for. In that garden, we weren't just planting flowers, we were planting a new beginning, and for the first time, peace felt real again. The HOA wasn't the same anymore. The secret meetings and backroom deals were gone. New leadership stepped in promising transparency and fairness. Rules were rewritten not to control, but to protect the people. Neighbors finally felt heard, their voices part of every decision. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood slowly faded. It was a new order built on trust, not fear. For the first time in years, Willowbrook felt like home again. The gardens thrived, the creek flowed freely, and so did the spirit of the community. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about balance, respect, and rebuilding what had been broken. And that balance brought hope. I launched the Murphy Water Initiative to teach neighbors about their rights. Water rights, land rights, and the power that knowledge brings. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a movement. We held workshops, shared stories, and equipped people to stand up for themselves. Knowledge became our greatest weapon. Every person who learned joined a growing community ready to protect what was theirs. I felt proud, turning my struggle into something bigger than myself. This was my legacy, flowing beyond my porch and garden. Because water isn't just life, it's a right, and I was determined to help others hold that truth tight. Together, we would change the story for good. Tom and I sat on my porch, cups of coffee warming our hands. The creek flowed steady nearby, gentle and calm. We watched the water ripple over smooth stones, and the same water that once divided us now connecting our lives. Sometimes, I said quietly, the only valve you need to turn is justice. We shared a nod, knowing how far we'd come. The fight had been hard, but it taught us the strength found in standing up not just for yourself, but for what's right. The garden bloomed again, alive with new hope. And as the sun rose, casting gold over the trees, I felt peace in a way I never had before. This land wasn't just mine anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the power of truth. And that was worth every battle.